My dear friends, today on the Do Roboti channel, we will show you the process of window production from collecting the materials through welding and making the window frames to glazing, so there's a lot to see and we're getting to work. With me is Piotr, welcome. He's a representative of Adams, a window manufacturer. What are we going to cover today?
We'll start from the very beginning, so we'll see the warehouse where the semi-finished product arrives, where it's stored and then prepared for the production process. From the pre-assembly process, which is the preparation of the profile, through joining, which is the so-called assembly, adding the fittings, assembling the hardware, and then there's the so-called the mating process, which is joining the sashes with the frames, buffer sections, which means storing the semi-finished product and then sending it for glazing. The bars are 6.5 meters long, so they're quite long. However, the warehouse is designed in such a way that we have access to every slot because these racks are mobile. Here we can see an example of a pull-out rack, which means we can pull out the whole thing and have access to each individual element. We use PVC systems from reputable suppliers which are delivered to us by specialized transport. They are then unpacked here and stored until the production process.
A question about these materials, are you stocked with everything? It's hard to say everything, but for the production process, do you handle whatever comes in?
No, actually not. We would like to, but due to the variety of systems we have and the different colors we offer, we can't have everything in stock. So here we keep elements for our shortest lead time orders. Our minimum lead time is 5 business days. 5 days for windows? Yes, 5. Wait, 5 business days. That's our shortest time to make the final product, meaning the window, yes. And the elements we keep here are what we need for that.
But when people build houses and wait about 3 months?
Exactly. The windows will take 3 months because they have to wait their turn in the production process. At any given time on that production line, we have on average, I estimate, about 500 windows in the production process. All the time, something is moving somewhere on the production line, shifting toward the final product, so it's a queuing system. So those 5 business days are really for the simplest products, which we can sort of take from stock. So, well, for the basic ones, plus we can do it directly, but there are also products for which the client has to wait a few weeks, where, for example, the delivery of a specific material is required.
So I'll roll up my sleeves, we move from the warehouse, we take the material, and we produce windows. 500 windows in production mode, really?
In 8 hours, yes. We're actually considering doubling our production capacity since we have that potential.
So I'll help out and we'll double it.
Everyone's involved. We'll definitely make it.
So we take the material and move on.
In this place, it's the so-called edging process, which means applying colored foil to the core. The first process is the preparation section, where the profile is cleaned, the surface of the profile is cleaned, and a substance is applied that is meant to soften the surface so that the glued surface will have proper adhesion. In other words, so it sticks, basically, yes. Next is the process of evaporating and heating the profile. Then the profile is heated. At that point, polyurethane, which is the substance used to join poly-PVC with the profile, doesn't like it. That is, it doesn't like thermal shock. So we have to make sure that all the elements that will meet each other have a similar temperature, right? Then the prepared glue is placed in a special device. On the other side, we have a melter, where the glue is melted, pumped through a heated hose, and pushed to the glue applicator head. We apply the glue to the film, which is unwound, and then the spot gluing process takes place through a series of rollers. So these rollers basically replicate the shape of the profile, okay? And that's the whole point and really the finesse of this process. So the workers who operate at this stage are able to set the rollers in such a way that the bonded layer adheres perfectly at every point, yes.
And what caught my attention is that we have a sticker on this Veka profile. Veka makes me think of a manufacturer of frames or electric ones. Exactly.
Yes. One of our suppliers we work with is the Veka PVC profile system. Okay.
But why are you already sticking this on?
Exactly, let me explain. We stick it on because our process is technologically consistent with the process carried out at the Veka factories. In other words, our process and their process are identical. And our product and the product bought in WC are exactly the same. We are standing by our main machine for producing windows for the so-called pre-assembly. This is a cutting and processing center that processes a full 6 or 6.5 meter bar, depending on the type of profile and the system provider, through all the steps that we will now go through one by one. And here, the production process on this machine usually consists of 3 or 4 operators. Here, where we are standing, this is like the most important element, because here is the main machine operator who is responsible for loading the production files from our server into the system. So he knows which batch he has to cut at this moment. He loads this production batch into the IT system. The machine already knows everything before being introduced into the first module. This module is responsible for milling all the structural holes in the window, which later function in some way, right? So this is a set of drainage holes, vent holes, including holes for handles and holes for various additional systems, like, for example, new ventilators. And this is where everything happens, right in this first module. Here's a fun fact. The profile still has its full length. Well, yes, it still has its full length. Yes, so at this stage of milling, it's still at its full length, right? The next module in this machine is the cutting module. And that's where the profile is actually cut to the specified lengths, which in the next process will allow the window to be made. Profiles are cut.
Now we have these metal elements. These are also structural parts of the window.
Exactly. This is the most important element. It's like the backbone of the window, right? So it's something that gives the window the right stability. That means it's rigid, and because of that, it's airtight. And thanks to these kinds of profiles, notice that this isn't just some ordinary iron that's been bent somewhere. Above all, it's shaped in a specific way. So it has a shape that matches the system that's being processed at the moment, and it has a coated surface that protects it from possible moisture, which prevents it from rusting if moisture gets in, right? So this profile is also protected against corrosion. I'll put it in now. Am I doing it right? Yes, very well. Yes, and we insert it just up to this point. Oh, flush with the back, that's even. Here. Yes, and you click here. Great. Well,
You did it and attached the sticker.
and this profile. Gently. Exactly. That's why the operator must read the screen information to know which setting to use. The label is also crucial, as it creates the product's entire history. Next, there is special machines that join PVC to steel, which connects PVC with steel. A screw is fed through a pneumatic hose, the so-called screw. Self-drilling screw, which means a combination of a drilling element with a thread, so it drills and screws in, permanently connecting PVC with steel. And later, in the final stage, also automatically, the hardware elements of the window sash are attached, in this case, the strikers. Catches, meaning these are the things that later allow the sash to be pressed, closed, and make it tight and secure, right? And all of this is done automatically by the machine. You're talking about this automatic process, but I see 2 ladies behind me. Done automatically without any manual operation.
Widzę tu za swoimi plecami dwie panie.
Exactly. These 2 ladies are kind of like the end of the process. And a very important stage, which is the stage where a check is made to see if the machine has performed all the tasks correctly in its process. And also a very important stage, which is placing the element into the sorting bin, of course, in the correct place. This is very important because the correct place will later be recognized in the next production stages. Of course, there is also another production screen for this. Besides providing information to the operator about which slot to put the profile in, it also leaves a trace in the production process, because the entire process is tracked by a computer program, right? And now, after scanning and logging into the system, we can see at what time this profile left the production process. We can do even more. We can see which operator was logged into the machine at that moment.
So here we already have a process that we can notice in the final result. So let's say we're making this frame, right?
Exactly. Welding is the process of joining elements that were previously prepared during pre-assembly. Here we are already creating a finished element, whether it's a door frame, which is the frame element, or the sash, which is the movable element. You can now hear the preparatory process in the background, reinforcing the perimeter and preparing the profile for welding. Then the next stage will be the extension of the heating mirror, which will melt the surfaces to be joined together until they become plastic.
So all these angles and joints are not being twisted yet? No.
No, just this. Only the element is joined and turned on. What you're talking about, so-called additional reinforcements in the corners, are only used in very large constructions like entrance doors, for example. There are special blocks there that are additionally inserted, and inserts also fill the inner element, and then the reinforcement is even stronger, and the corners are even more firmly joined.
So here we already have the window frame ready, welded, still warm, like fresh rolls, and you can see the elegant weld. Nothing is sticking out, nothing needs to be hidden.
Exactly. What we saw in the welding process, at the final stage, the stamps come down, which are supposed to form the weld and make the so-called finishing. We are at the stage of fitting the elements that were previously welded, so installing the parts that are needed for the window to function later, that is, to open and close it. We saw some of these fittings in the initial stages. They were still being mounted by the machine, but it's not possible to mount everything with the machine. That's why there are also manual stages. The characteristic of these tables is that the worker has all the necessary elements with him, the ones he uses for this fitting process, and the part he is working on is delivered to him by the upper part of the conveyor belt. After finishing, he sends it to the lower part.
And here too, it should be noted, as we keep seeing, that with each process we have a different window, a different size, a different solution, opening upwards, downwards, micro hinge, micro deviation, and so on. The worker likely has all the necessary tightening elements shown on the screen, right?
Exactly. That's why that label was needed, which we stuck on at a certain stage, because it's a barcode and it carries all the information about the window's construction. Production screens help the worker assess what needs to be done on a specific element. In relation to what you said, that every element is different, and really both in size and function it's different, so you couldn't handle it in a way where the worker would just keep everything in his head or have a pile of papers to look through and search and so on. Here the workers are also a bit different, they're trained differently. At the beginning, the worker who is assigned and selected to work at the hardware installation stage starts working there. He works for some time with a skilled worker, learns the tricks of the trade, gets to know the elements, and learns how to read from the production screen. And then slowly he starts to become independent until he eventually works completely on his own. That's right.
I can also see in the background here that measurements are important, measuring these elements so that, for example, the hinge isn't accidentally 3 units too far away, for instance.
In most cases, machines assist in the hardware installation process. Because there are these micro markers here, which are hard to even see, but under each element there's a micro marker made by the center, and elements are also used for this purpose. But you can't automate everything. That's why manual work is still present, for example, here in the measurement process. Accuracy is very important, even though this is a construction product, so builders say the tolerance is quite large. That's not exactly how it is with windows. Here, even 3 matter.
So here we have the process of assembling the window sashes, which is where the glass is later installed, and they are similar to the frames.
Exactly. On twin machines, the technology is exactly the same, just a bit different, a different profile. It's not clear what it's used for. Here again, a computer appears where the worker, after scanning the label, gets full information about which elements need to be attached to this profile. But notice that it's only being fastened. Here, he doesn't use any screws or fastening elements because this part is only for assembly. The next stage is a fully automated device that does this in an automatic process. So it screws it in, twists it.
Exactly.
It recognizes what kind of window it is, what type of hardware it has, and then using 4 independent devices, it screws the hardware to the profile.
And all these assembly lines are designed by specialized companies according to your order.
That's how it looks. The machines, yes, but the line itself, the process itself, is arranged by us. We have plans for additional devices that are already designed with a lot of our involvement, which will have an impact at the production stages. This means that the production process will be easier for the worker, so it will be less physically demanding, and this will result in a higher number of units produced. We are in a very important place. In our language, this is called the marrying process. Marrying meaning we can't cheat. Marrying, we cheat. We are joining 2 very important elements of the window, the frame and the sash.
Here we have the sashes.
As you can clearly see, we have the sashes, yes. The frames, which we saw earlier during the production stage, arrive nicely by train, and here the train below brings us the elements to work on, which are placed on the table and then go through the production process. The worker scans the frame, and from the screen up there, it shows him the position number from which he should take the sash.
So in terms of timing, it looks pretty much the same in production. On one line, the frames are produced, and on the other, the sashes, so that both are ready at the same time and nothing is wasted.
Yes, that's the point of production, to synchronize everything so it all comes together here.
And here, as you can see, the gentlemen are fitting and checking things.
How they moved. Yes, this is the moment when the window for the first time has its real shape. It's just missing the glass. So installing the sash allows us to assess whether everything is okay with the window. So this is the first complete quality control of the final product. Here we can also see the quality control inspector who happens to be here supporting the process and randomly checking the product very thoroughly. Randomly, because each window is also normally inspected by an employee.
What would windows be like without insulated glass units? And what does the process look like since you make them here?
Right? Exactly. Although not 100% of the elements are produced by us because our production is quite large, we use over 800 insulated glass units per day, so we weren't able to produce all of them ourselves. But about 30 or even 40 panes that we install in our windows are produced right here in the place where we are now. The base glass, which we use for production, comes from the glassworks. The glassworks delivers it with their own specialized transport for large packages. Interestingly, the glass measures 6 meters wide by 3.21 meters high. Yes, that translates to almost 200 kilograms for a single 4mm pane. But it's delivered in packages, so the whole set of panes that arrives there is it's about 30 tons of glass. A package consisting of many of these panes weighs about 5 tons, so later a large crane is used to simply unload the panes and place them in the warehouse, from which individual panes are then taken for the production process.
All right, but now let's imagine or show how in the process a 4mm pane is turned into, let's say, a triple glazed insulated glass unit.
Exactly, yes, triple glazed units. The whole thing is filled with argon gas with a concentration of at least 90, so that besides being able to look at the world through these beautiful clean panes, they are also good heat insulators. In the first stage, after cutting the pane is of course cut. Again, optimization, meaning the solution is chosen so that the waste is as small as possible and it's prepared for washing, right? So the first stage is washing. We're standing here right next to such a washing machine. Inside, there's a system that simply washes the panes. There are special brushes with very soft bristles that sweep over the pane as it moves through the device. This is quality control, which means that after washing, the pane moves onto a special line where there are lamps underneath that shine, and the worker can assess whether the pane has been properly washed. Because the pane is hermetically sealed during the process, it's already inside, so we can't reach it anymore. So a mistake at the washing stage results in a pane that isn't washed or is dirty, right? And the pane has to be perfectly clean. It can't have any streaks or smudges. The next stage we're at is applying the spacer frame. As I mentioned, this is an insulated glass unit. We use a spacer frame to join 2 or 3 panes of glass. I have one with me right now. So, it's an element that serves 2 key functions in an insulated glass unit. First, it creates the gap between the panes and holds the glass together so they maintain a constant distance. Second, because it's inside. As you can see here, it's hollow inside. And along the frame, there are special grooves, tiny little holes. That's because it's filled with a special substance. In our case, we call it a molecular sieve. Its purpose is to absorb the moisture that gets trapped inside the insulated glass unit during sealing. Inside the insulated glass unit, we have argon gas. The standards require the argon concentration to be at least 90%. For us, it's about 95%.
So those 5% are Masurian air?
Exactly. So every window that ends up somewhere at your place from our production contains at least 5% Masurian air. Oh,
but let's not test it just to test it.
What it does. No, you'd have to break it for that. But this Masurian air has the humidity that is exactly at this moment in the room. And if it weren't for the agent that absorbs this moisture, meaning the absorbent that's placed inside this frame, that moisture would condense on the inside surfaces of the glass in the insulated unit. How did we even manage to combine these 2 panes together, right? Well, as I mentioned, thanks to this frame and a special strip of adhesive mass called butyl, which is permanently elastic, it will never permanently dry out during the lifespan of the insulated glass. That's so that the joint is always flexible, because the glass in the window moves. There's pressure that causes the panes to come together, there's pressure that makes them move apart. And then, if it weren't for this flexible joint, the movement of the panes would simply cause them to lose their seal. So, on the outer part of the insulated glass unit, a semi-component polyurethane with a consistency of 1:10 is applied. So we basically have 2 components, the main mass and a special system, a hardener mixer that causes the chemical process to occur. After mixing, it's applied through a nozzle onto the insulated glass. And then, in the final stage, it is sealed. The edges are adjusted and then set aside for the so-called cooling process, which completes the hermetization process. Okay.
And these assembled glass packages move on to the waiting area, so to speak. That's right. And then they are installed in the frames.
But not sooner than at least 2 to 3 hours after the sealing process, because that's roughly the bonding time at a temperature of about 18 degrees, right?
We've already shown quite a few stages. Be sure to subscribe to this channel and leave a like under this video out of respect for this whole process.
Because when we open and close this window, we don't even think about how many people have to work here, how many processes, how many technological ideas go into all of this, so that we can simply close the window and sit at home. So remember to give a thumbs up, and now we're moving on to glazing these units. The glass from the waiting area has already arrived here. The frames from the other waiting area have arrived here, and now we're glazing.
We're glazing, that's right.
How does it look? Are colored setting blocks included?
Yes, spacers. These are the elements that hold the glass in the window frames and transfer the load from the window to the glass, right? So it's the proper arrangement. These spacers are not put there by accident, and their thickness is not random. These panes have different weights. I estimate it's around 10 to 20 kilograms, so it's not a huge weight. But yes, the glass we're looking at here will weigh well over 200 kilograms. That's right. And here, theoretically, a person wouldn't be able to do this physically, by hand. But with an assisting device like a crane and a pneumatic cabinet, it's no problem at all. One worker can do it.
And then other workers make sure that the glass doesn't fall out of our house.
Doesn't fall out. So the end of the glazing process is inserting the so-called glazing beads. Glazing beads, or clips in other words, are prepared in advance, cut for optimal fit. This optimization, it keeps coming up, is there to make sure the material is used as efficiently as possible to avoid production waste. But there's also some silicone. How much is used here? This silicone is a compound that's meant to keep the spacers that were inserted from shifting during transport, right? The last stage is quality control, which we'll move on to in a moment. This is the process where a visual inspection takes place, marking the end of the production process, and documents are attached, meaning the so-called finished product label. Details about the window type, parameters, and a QR code are provided.
Now I see how the gentlemen are tapping quite precisely on those strips with the little hammer. But honestly, are there cases where the hammer still strikes it incorrectly and the pane of glass, which has gone through 10 stages of production, breaks?
Here, unfortunately, we can use the saying here that when you chop wood, chips fly. Yes, unfortunately, such cases do happen, whether it's with the hammer or during the insertion process. Unfortunately, glass is quite a fragile element, so it gets damaged or cracked, and unfortunately, such a unit is no longer usable. It simply has to be replaced with a new one.
Piotr, production is finished. We're also here in your showroom so people can come in from the street and see what these windows will look like. But in the end, you sell them to dealers, right? You can't buy them directly?
Yes, we have a lot of our dealers, about 500 as of today.
And also, to sum up the work at the factory that we showed, it's very extensive. How many employees work here?
Well, we count that there are over 400 employees in total, right?
But it's not just production.
But also offices, no, because we also have, the whole loading logistics, the whole transport logistics. We also have those sales departments, strictly sales, because when an order comes in, it has to be processed, right? First, it's processed by the sales department, which kind of reprices it, checks if everything is okay. There's a separate technology department that determines if the order is smart, if it's technologically correct, and if there are no errors.
Let's focus on those employees and the work we showed today, meaning strictly production work from, let's say, basic jobs and workers. How does it look in terms of salary financing, benefits? How does it generally look in your company?
Well, of course, salaries here also depend on the skill level of these people, right? Obviously, that's a given because in our case, we really value employees who can work in different positions. Okay. And the broader his knowledge and ability to work in different positions, the higher the salary, right? Well,
but I come in completely green?
I don't know anything, right? Okay, so if someone comes in green, then for such a completely green employee, we start with the minimum wage, right? That's what we call the minimum wage. However, in our case, it's not exactly the lowest national minimum because we also have bonuses that an employee can earn right from the start, even on this initial, let's say, first contract.
A bonus? For what? We come to work and we can already get a bonus?
Yes, that's right, okay? There's what's called a regulatory bonus, and it's theoretically a basic bonus that may not increase the rate by much, but it does increase it a bit. But the main thing an employee can get is what's called a discretionary bonus. And this discretionary bonus comes directly from the production volume. We have a system for calculating this bonus, and then at the end of each month, every employee is evaluated by their direct supervisor, that is the foreman. The employee gets a rating agreed upon with the shift manager, starting from 0 if no effort was made.
So we stay at this rate, the lowest base rate, but if we make an effort...
But if I'm good, if I get involved, then I can get a rating of up to 4 points. And then those points, of course, in the amount of the cash bonus depend on the size of the production. Because every item that comes off the production line is priced, and so-called during the day, during the month, we build our budget, right? We allocate and distribute an amount to employees based on their evaluation.
Right? I haven't seen anything like that before, but it's interesting. So you have it? That's interesting.
That's simply that the employee kind of on their own can work it out for themselves, has the opportunity to work it out for themselves.
These are real bonuses, like 200 or 500, I don't know.
Yes, exactly. That's what they are. Let's start with the basics. So let's say those people who didn't really manage to get too involved, it may still happen, meaning they didn't have the opportunity to get those maximum scores. So it's around 100, maybe a bit more even, depending on the month. A point can sometimes cost even 200 zlotys. So even for just 1 point, you can get 200 zlotys, right? But if you have, let's say, 4 points, that's already 800, right? And that's simply how we calculate it. We also have an interesting option which we sometimes encourage employees to use so they can take advantage of working overtime if there's a need. Because of course, overtime doesn't come from having a pre-planned process of working overtime. It's more of a need that comes up in the moment, right? So sometimes a certain amount of work or orders comes to the production line, like 1,000 windows or more. We know this comes from the production process, that it's quite difficult, it requires more time and more effort. And then we know that during the day, the need arises. There's a need, it would be good if the employee stayed longer. In our case, the rate increases by 50%, right? So every overtime hour started, every hour worked as overtime, has an increased rate by 50%.
Great, that's also nice to hear. And later, probably depending on experience, engagement, or further promotions, of course, yes, then these rates are much higher.
Yes. We start with what's called a trial contract, well, a probationary one, which lasts 2 months, and those 2 months are exactly the time when we get to know each other. I always tell the employee during the conversation that these 2 months are there so that we can recognize the employee's level of engagement, whether they want to learn or not. Yes.
We still need to guide them by the hand a little bit.
Exactly. But it's also time for the employee. Those 2 months are their time to see if this is really what they want to do, right? I'm not saying for life, that might be saying too much, but just if they'd like to do it, right? If it suits them. And we work exclusively under standard employment contracts. We don't use any other additional things like, I don't know, contracts for specific work or anything like that. No. In our company, there is only one form of employment, and that's an employment contract.
Great. These conditions we've heard about here, it's really nice to hear that such companies operate in Poland, such factories, a fully Polish factory, Polish owner. In Poland, yes. So it's very nice to hear that. Pay rates start at the basic level because it's reasonable. You can't offer a high rate to someone without skills or experience. Everyone has to start somewhere and build familiarity.
After 2 months, the manager discusses if the employee has reached a certain level, if it's time to raise their pay, or if they should stay at the basic rate.
And I think to sum up this material, this production is really nice. I'm surprised by many of the stages. For example, those metal profiles that we put into the window. I didn't know before that something like that is actually put into windows. So you guys definitely write in the comments under this episode what interested you the most during the production process. This process was extensive, so I think there will definitely be a lot of comments under this episode. Thank you very much for inviting me here and for letting me visit your factory. It definitely turned out to be an interesting episode because, well, everything was here. Everyone made it to the very end. Be sure to leave those thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and get to work. If you're interested in working here, all the links are in the description. Thank you. Great. Your knowledge is really incredibly impressive.
A bit of experience and years of work. So, well, it does the job. It does the job.
This is Wojtek Kaczmarczyk. I'm really glad you made it to the very end. Thank you for watching this video, and I encourage you to check out more videos on the Do Roboty channel. Check out the next video to see what interesting things I've recorded.